Okay, good morning, class. So I want to start off by apologizing. I had recorded a summary and discussion on book one and book two of Sir Gawain in the Green Knight, or at least I thought I had, but I never hit the record button. So I'm going to go ahead and cover all three books in today's lecture that we have read up to this point, right? So that would be Sir Gawain in the Green Knight, books one, two, and three, and as well as some of the key plots and things that we need to consider getting into these stories and how they work and the meanings behind them, right? So, um, the first thing we get right at the beginning of the book is detailed, you know, details about the fall of Troy, as well as this. There's several heroes that are mentioned into Roman identity, right? There's Aeneas, Romulus, and then there's also Brutus, who is, of course, very, very English in his name. And the reason the author is doing this because he himself, the author, who is unknown, there's no accredited author to this work from the 1300s, and there's been speculation on who it might be, but we don't really know for sure. And so the best that scholars were able to determine is that, of course, he's a rather educated nobleman from the 1300s, because there's some anxieties within the film, right? There's this sort of conflict in identity, and there's like anxiety in the way they even present King Arthur. Right at the beginning, they say he's young, right? They present a youthful King Arthur and a young Guinevere, and they're like in the prime of their celebrations. They're enjoying life, especially at this time of year, which is during the Christmas season, or more specifically, this is right at the end of the Christmas season, which would be New Year's Eve, and then the following is the end. It's New Year's Day, and so they were having a large celebration at this time, uh, and it's also connected to their ancestry, right? The Christian beliefs that came with them, and then transformed into, rather than a winter solstice, to a Christian holiday, right? And so this is the purpose for the introduction of Troy, the introduction of Aeneas, Brutus, all this lengthy kind of description of Roman ancestry, because the author is trying to say, here's who we are as a British people. We descended from Brutus, who founded London, and then ultimately helped build England as a kingdom. But we are also founded in our roots in the Celtic religions, which were, of course, labeled pagan at the time. In some cases, they're referred to as pagan in a derogatory term, but there was really no other way to say it than that, which was not Christian, was pagan, and so that's the term. It wasn't necessarily as derogatory as we consider it today. So the author is saying we descend from Rome and we descend from the Celtic people, and so we are both encompassed. And this idea of knighthood of King Arthur and his court is filled with influence from his Celtic beliefs, right? Christianity and Roman ideology brings structure and literally concrete structures, right? They have the Roman roads, which were made of conglomerate of, stones and sediment to make concrete. And then they also built their castles out of stone, their structures out of stone, where the Celtic people originally lived in more hut-like structures. They lived more closely towards with the land, um, and so that ideology comes into conflict with the green world around it, right? The nature that exists. However, it's still part of their belief. When we talk about fairies, elves, imps, any of these sort of beliefs, even witches and druids, that all comes from their Celtic belief in this world that is magical, that exists next to us, is parallel to us at all times. And even when you say certain things, you invoke certain spirits, and that's dangerous, right? That's why you hang iron above your door. That's why, specifically, a cross, right? An iron cross, because it's combining the two. It's saying we believe in Christianity and this idea of Christ, a figure, but we also still hold on to our pagan original beliefs of fairy and magics and things that could get you if you weren't paying attention to your traditions or to the proper steps to deal with the fairy world, also called the green world, because of course it encompassed all that was natural in nature. It could be scary, but it could also be rewarding if you knew how to deal with it. And so that's what we get during this celebration, right? The green world quite literally breaks its way into King Arthur's court in the form of the Green Knight. He is green from head to toe. He's described in a way that makes him feel or seem more plant-like rather than human, right? His beard is a bush, his thighs are big as tree trunks and things like that. And so he's gargantuan in proportion, but he's also very natural in design and elements. So he looks like he just came from a tree itself, right? That birthed this knight. And so it is off-putting because the knights who are celebrating Christianity and Christmas know that there is this other magics at work, and so they are cautious. But the Green Knight tries to put them at ease. Even though he carries an axe in one hand, he brings a holly branch, which traditionally a sign of fertility and love. But in this case, he's using it in place of an olive branch, right? He's saying, "I bring this as a sign of peace towards your religion," and then he wants to play a game. And so this is crucial because it's testing something about Catholicism or Christianity in the court, right? It's going to test how well their virtues are intertied, because being a knight in King Arthur's court meant two things. You had to live by the knight's codex, right? The knight's code of honor, right? Meaning that you could not strike an unarmed opponent. If you were on a horse, you couldn't fight somebody who was not on a horse. It was all about equality, right? If you were going to fight an opponent, you had to meet on equal terms, and then you could see who the victor would be. There are also other codes, right? That you respect women. You should always put your life in on the line to save a woman, regardless of her stature, whether she's a noble lady or a common lady, whatever it's going to be. You kind of had to live by all these rules. You always had to respect authority, meaning you had to put the lords above you in a higher pedestal and always listen to what they said, right? So this is sort of the Knight's Codex, but it's also tied into Christian beliefs, right? This sort of honor, virtue, and things that are derived from religion. And so the Green Knight comes in and he says, "Who will play this game with me? Who will take one swing of their axe on me and then allow me to swing my axe at them next?" And nobody says anything, right? Then he starts to call them babes. He says, "Are these just children here, right? I've come to challenge this court," and it's a famous court, right? It's King Arthur's court, so they're supposed to be the best knights in the land, and nobody's willing to take up his challenge except for Arthur, who, as king, has to take up the arms if nobody else is going to, right? So he says he'll take the swing, and that's when Gawain intercedes. He says, "I'll do it in your stead," and he's doing this for two reasons, right? First, it's not knightly, it's not chivalrous to swing at an unarmed opponent, right? So in doing so, he would disgrace himself as a knight. That is King Arthur. King Arthur would disgrace himself as a knight if he were to kill the Green Knight, who is unarmed and kneeling in front of him. And then secondly, because they are aware that there's some sort of natural sort of pagan magic at work, he's worried that there is a trick behind it, and if this trick works, then maybe King Arthur is putting his life on the line, right? And so Gawain is aware of these two things, and so he's at a conflict with his knightly codes, right? He has to respect his king, and he has to protect his king, but that means that he's going to then have to take a cowardly swing at an unarmed opponent. But he does so. He volunteers, and the way the game blow for blow works in tradition is you had to put aside those two fears, right? You had to be a knight, and that meant not taking a full swing or not really hurting your opponent when you swung your axe, to show that you are honorable, meaning that you would give them a chance to fight on fair terms, meaning after you took their swing, they could then take their own swing, and if nobody died and you still had this sort of beef between you, then you can fight fairly. But that then also challenges your integrity as a person, or your courage in the face of death. Because if you chose not to take a full swing and you let your opponent stand up, then they in turn got to take a swing at you, and there is no telling how honorable or how courteous they would be in extending that same sort of forbearance on their swing. And if they decided to go full swing, then they could kill you. So these are the two things that work, right? The fear of disgracing himself as a knight, and then the fear of letting him up to take a swing in return, and thus putting his own life at risk. And so rather than allow that to happen, he decides, you know what, I'm just going to go all out. I'd rather disgrace myself as a knight because I don't want to die at the hands of this Green Knight. And so he does. He takes a full swing. He decapitates the Green Knight. His head goes rolling around on the floor. Some people kick it in fear or maybe in jest. Maybe they're having fun with it. But ultimately, they're just kind of like left with a moment of silence before the Green Knight's body rises, grabs his head. He carries it up to his horse where he mounts again, and then he tells him, a year and a day, meet me in the Green Chapel, right? He is a Green Knight from the Green Chapel, and that's where in a year and a day, meaning the next New Year's Day, he would then get his return swing on Gawain. So he's giving him this last year of life to enjoy and kind of just like live it to the fullest, right? And so this is pretty much because of a failing on Sir Gawain's part, right? He came in peace, he was intimidating, and he did insult the court, but he never made any sort of aggressive action towards them. He never hurt anybody. And so in his cowardice, his fear for his own life, he struck and he disgraced himself. And so Gawain ultimately loses his game, a blow for blow, because now he must meet the Green Knight and he must accept the blow that is dealt to him, which was one of full force, with the expectation that he will decapitate Gawain as well, right? And so that's pretty much where book one ends. Book two is just a little bit of talks about the cyclical nature of life, right? It talks about how year follows year, yet nothing is ever the same, specifically towards people. But when we look at the cycles of life, you know, winter breaks into spring where the rains start and green and grass starts to grow, and then in summer you're at the full bloom of life. Everything is fertile and green, and then after summer it starts to dry up, right? There's a little bit of a drought, and so all that was green starts to die. And then when you get to winter again, all that was life and flourished eventually dies. And so this is kind of also encapsulating Sir Gawain's experience as a person, right? He lives his life, he's born, and then there's this opportunity to spring into life, right? To kind of grow into manhood, to be full experience, full life, as a human can. And then he's in the summer. Currently he's in the summer of that existence, right? He's at the peak of his glory and fame, right? The renown of Sir Gawain is known, and so he's kind of at that summer, at his apex. And then now he's approaching his own fall and winter, but quite literally he's approaching fall and winter, which will then be his death, right? So while he might have many more youthful years in him to experience life and to go on adventures and quest as a knight, it is all coming to an end rather shortly, right? And so that's the emphasis on nature and the imagery behind it. And so what happens is after Halloween, on All Saints Day, the day after, I believe is what it's called, he has to get ready to go, right? He knows if he doesn't know where the Green Chapel's at, A, he's got to find it, and B, if it's far, he needs to travel far to get there. And so he's giving himself all of November into December, into the end of December, to try and find it, because he knows he's going to need a little bit of help. And so sure enough, he wanders around, right? He goes up and down Brook and Dale trying to find the Green Knight. But I did jump ahead. There's a lot of emphasis on how they dress him, right? From his sabatons to his cuisses, and then his garbs underneath, and over that, right? Everything's in fine, shining steel, brand new, with interlays of gold and beautiful designs, because this is, in a sense, they're preparing him for his death, and so they want to send him off, at least send him towards his death in his finest weeds, right? What they would call clothing, or his finest armor. And so they have this honor for him, this sort of respect. They even throw a party because they know, they're like, oh, it's terrible that Sir Gawain is going to die. We could have stopped this, but nobody did, and so now all we can do is mourn him, because nobody here would blame him for not going, but we know he has to go. And so there's sort of this conflicting language that's being used when referring to Gawain, because in essence everybody's glad it's not them, right? If they would have to face this trial, they knew and they know death is the only reward for this trial, then they're pretty much glad that it's not them. Now they're sad that it's Gawain, who was the most noble and has must now face the consequences of that. And they know that they can stop him and say, yeah, don't do it, it's no big deal. But nobody wants to do that because they're held by honor and virtue, right? This sort of idea that the thing that's keeping them from saving a man's life is honor and virtue. So there's a little bit of a criticism towards that, right? The author is very intently saying this is silly. And so we have a little bit more of the depiction of his armor, and we also get the image of the shield that they give him, which has a pentacle, which is just a star, usually within a circle, and that's what they put on his shield, and they say it represents the interlocking of knighthood and Christianity and faith, right, as well as his moral standing. And so he has to have all these parts together, intertwined, interlocked in perfect symmetry, in order to be the perfect person or the perfect Christian, right? And so in order to reinforce his Christian values through Catholicism, they try to guilt you, right? And so the image that they put on the inside of his shield is that of the Virgin Mary, so that way if he ever struggles or feels lost, he can then look upon the visage of Mary, and that guilt or compassion that she shows him will then drive him on, right? And it does come in handy, because as he's wandering around from November 1st until December 28th-ish, 29th, which is already like 59 days of wandering, sleeping on rocks near the road and under rain and trees. Like, he is pretty battered and bruised by the elements for these almost 60 days, right? And so finally, after asking anybody he could where the Green Chapel was, and everybody's saying they don't know, he kind of like realizes it's Christmas Eve and that the next day would be Christmas. And so in desperation, he looks at the visage of Mary and he prays to her, right? He says, give me some place where I can worship the gift of your son honorably and as proper as he can, which would mean a church and hopefully a home or a housestead that he can stay at. And while he's wandering, a light breaks through upon Berdalac's keep, and he's still kind of like blindly giving himself the sign of the cross as he rides the horse. And then when he looks up, he sees Berdalac's keep with a beam of light shining through the clouds, and as he looks through the forest, he can see the walls of a castle, and he knows it's a nice castle. It's an upstanding location, place that would be perfect for him. And so he rides on in appreciation for what he has been shown, but also to quote unquote celebrate Christmas, right? And so he gets there. They let him in to meet the Lord Berdalac, and who Berdalac graciously brings him into his keep, because he's one of the Knights of the Round Table, and that's the most esteemed knight he's ever hosted. And so he treats him with kindness. Then they start to celebrate and drink, but also while they're drinking, he introduces him to Berdalac introduces Gawain to his wife, and then to another older woman who's the keeper of Berdalac's wife, right? She's her attendant. She follows her everywhere. And then there's a brief description on how they appear and the kind of contradiction between their appearances, or at least the opposition in how they appear. For example, Berdalac's wife is described by Gawain as being more beautiful than Guinevere, who is King Arthur's wife, and is supposed to be the most beautiful woman in all of England. But this woman he sees is even more beautiful, and so he's immediately smitten with her, right? He's already like, wow, like this is a hot woman, and I just totally think she's beautiful. And then he notices the woman next to her, which is the attendant, and she's old and wrinkled, and even he says her skin is yellow compared to the fairness of the wife, which of course fairness being white, milky skin was considered beautiful in these British times. And so the old lady, who is still white, but has aged and has sort of this leathery appearance to her skin, is the opposite. She's the she's very ugly as far as women would go, according to Gawain, right? And she plays a role a little bit later, but mostly it's focused on Bertilac's wife and the way she appears. And she's also smitten with Gawain, as well as all the women in the court. They see Gawain, they see a knight of King Arthur's court, and they're all like, wow, like, we need to get to know this guy. But he sticks next to Bertilac. They drink heavily, right? They party it up. They're having a good time. And while they're drinking, Bertilac then proposes another game, right? He says, whatever I win in the woods, I will give to you, and whatever you earn or win here in the castle, you will trade to me. And of course, Gawain's like, this is your castle. How can I win anything? And he's like, well, then you don't have anything to lose. All you will do is gain what I give you. And so then Gawain's like, all right, cool. That sounds like a deal. But there's a little bit more going on, right? If we were to consider the game he played previously, which was the blow for blow, the chopping game with the Green Knight, he's failed at this game, and now he's forfeit his life, right? He's pretty much saying that when he meets the Green Knight, his body is destined to meet its end, and so he will die. But at least if he goes, he dies with honor and virtue. But now that there's another game being played, there's something else that's going to be tested and put at risk, right? Where the physical form is already given to the Green Knight. Now all he has left to lose is his soul through being honest and maintaining his integrity. And that's what's going to be tested in this next game, or at least when we get to book 3. Because when we get to book 3, the thing we're going to see is the temptation of Bertilac's wife on Gawain as she comes to him night after night, and then offers him some sort of keepsake to save him from the Green Knight, right? And so in book 3, it starts with a very stark contrast between Bertilac and Gawain. Bertilac rises early. He goes to mass, right? Meaning he goes to, the first thing he does after rising is go to church to pray for and celebrate Christmas. And then he goes off into the hunt, right? To bring something back to his esteemed guest, to be a good host. And so Bertilac is portraying, completing his duties, and he's completing his duties well. Even though he was also up drinking with Gawain, matching him in every drink they took. But when we finally get the hunt on its way, then we sort of hear a little bit later on of what happens with Gawain, right? He awakes, the sun's already full up in the sky, meaning it's already midday, or I'm sorry, probably more around mid-morning, anytime between 8 to 10, because the sun is shining straight through the windows, and Gawain is barely waking up, right? He's barely getting up because of all the drink he had. And then finally, when he's sort of awake, he hears a door open, and of course, being that he's a knight in an unknown locate or an unknown keep, right? He doesn't know who Bertilac really is. He doesn't know the people that he has around him. He's still a little bit on edge, so he sits up, and then he opens the curtain a little bit, and he peeks out, and he sees that it's the Lady Bertilac. And so he, of course, at first he was worried about danger, so he wanted to see who was coming in to his room. When he sees it's the Lady Bertilac, he doesn't stop her. He knows that there's something off about her coming in while he's naked in bed, right? So he, rather than tell her to leave, he decides that he's just going to pretend to be asleep and hope that she comes in and leaves, right? I know all of us have done that once or twice in our life, right? Where we are up later than we should be, and then we can hear our parents coming to check on us, so we close our eyes real quick and close and pretend we're asleep, right? So that when they look in, they're like, okay, you're just asleep, and then they leave. And that's what he's kind of hoping, right? She'll peek in, see that he's asleep, and leave him alone. But that's not what she came for, right? She didn't just come to check on him. There's intent. There's also been a little bit of flirtatiousness between them before, and so now, rather than stop her, ask her to leave, and then get dressed so that they can talk in a more appropriate place, right, out in the courtyard or someplace public, He just kind of like lays there with his eyes closed, and so that gives her the opportunity to sneak to his bed. She pulls back the curtain, sees that he's fake sleeping, and so she sits upon the sheets, which then kind of pins him underneath them. Right? He can't get out because he's naked, he's indecent, and B, he can't pull the blankets out or move her without being aggressive or offending her. Right? So she tells him, I've caught a knight of King Arthur's court, right? And he's just like, oh, you caught me. I'm yours to do with as you please. So there's this sort of fencing that's happening with language, right? Um, in England, 1300s, and even earlier in the Arthurian days, you had to express wit, right? That's how you engage in conversation. You had to be wittier, you had to be smarter than the other. And when you had an exchange of words, whoever was wittier, who could turn a phrase or use the other person's words against him, was sort of the winner and would often get what they wanted from the conversation, because when you couldn't defend your position anymore, then you had to acquiesce to what the winner wanted. And so that's what's happening here, right? She's saying something, he's trying to counter with his own wit, and then she's turning it back on him, right? He's saying, I caught you. And he says, you caught me, but let me get up and get dressed. And she's like, no, you can't get up because you are caught. I will tie you to this bed if I have to, right? And so he's like, okay. So she caught me. Let's just play along with it. And so he jests with her, right? He jokes with her about being caught. And then she asks him about his acclaim, right? You're the Gawain of legend. How many women have you loved? How many women love you even in this court today? And he's just like, well, I wouldn't know about that. And then she's just like, she says, I will serve you. I will express my love to you. And he kind of like is like, oh, your husband, right? And she's at a loss for words, right? When he brings in her husband, but rather than letting the conversation end there, where he won this sort of verbal jousting, he says, but I'm also your knight and I'm here to serve you. And so that's when she quickly jumps in and says, well, if you're going to serve me and you are the Gawain of legend, right, the knight who has won many a woman's hand, then why don't you kiss me and then I'll leave. And so he does. So he gives her a kiss, and not in the appropriate knight form, right? A knight should kiss his lady on the hand and that's it, but he full on kisses her upon the lips, because he does think she's beautiful and he is tempted by her, right? He thinks she's attractive, and so he lets his temptations of her physical form, her body, win him over on this night. But everything will be okay as long as when the Lord Bertilac comes back, if they do end up exchanging their winnings, which happens, right? He brings back a deer that he had hunted in the woods, and he offers the deer for feast and for Gawain, who accepts it, and then in turn he kisses Bertilac upon the lips, right? He says, here's what I want. And Bertilac's, whoa, who's been flirting with you, right? Or who's been laying those warm kisses upon you? And Gawain's like, we said we would exchange gifts, not how we won them. And so Bertilac's, all right, okay, fair enough. Of course, he doesn't want to tell him because it was Bertilac's wife that had kissed him. And so he gives into that temptation, but he kind of is honest, at least in dealing with his host, and he gives a kiss back to Lord Bertilac. Now, I do want to address this sort of, maybe it seems awkward, maybe it seems inappropriate, but when it came to medieval times and earlier, knights and those of nobility would kiss their lords, usually on the hands and things like that. But it was not uncommon for those of equal standing to kiss on the lips as a sign of respect, right? This is just purely platonic love that they're expressing, and they're showing their affection for their fellow man, or a sign of respect. And so there was no sexual intent between how he kisses Bertilac, but that's not the same with women. As I had mentioned earlier, a lady would only receive a kiss on her hand. Anything above that hand or on her person or face would have a heavy implication of sexuality behind the kiss, right? You didn't kiss women as friends or in any other manner unless it was on the hand to show respect. Everything else was ripe with sexuality, right? And so this is sort of the difference between the two kisses Gawain is experienced, right? He's getting one out of lust and temptation, and then he's giving it back to Bertilac as respect and honor. And so he's kind of turning this back towards itself. But we see this happen two more nights in a row, right? The second night, he gets two kisses from the lady after they do their little verbal jousting back and forth. But when Bertilac returns with a boar that he had hunted, he offers it to Gawain, and Gawain gives him two kisses in return, right? And so the deal is met. He's kind of giving back that which he has gotten. And then he tells him, well, I have to go the next night, right? I really need to see where this green chapel's at. But Bertilac tells him, I'll show you, or I'll send somebody to show you where it's at. You don't have to worry. It's only a few miles down the road. Everything will be all right. And so he, not begrudgingly, but he does accept. I'm sorry, I kept getting this ringing in my ear and it was driving me crazy. But anyway, so that's sort of the exchange for the second night, right? The boar for two kisses. And then on the third night, which is going to be his last night there at the keep, the lady makes her intentions clear, right? She says, I'm going to lay with you this night, and I'm going to take what I can from Sir Gawain. And Gawain is tempted by her. He kisses her twice before he sees the visage of Mary on his shield, right? And the sudden guilt pulls him back from the temptation, and he realizes, like, nope, we can't take this any further. She's insulted, but she says, I understand. Just give me one more kiss and I'll leave. And so he does. But then before she leaves, she says, here, I'll give you this green sash. And he doesn't want to take it because as a knight, he shouldn't be accepting a love token from a married woman. But she tells him, it'll protect you from all harm. And so suddenly he's just like, wait, this can protect me from the Green Knight's axe? And he then takes it, right? She knows where he's going and what's going to happen, and so she's also offering it as a token to protect him from death, and Gawain accepts it on these terms. However, he can't give it to Bertilac for two reasons, right? First, if he gives it to Bertilac, then he's forfeiting the protection that he just gained from the Green Knight, meaning that he then again would be at risk of death. And second, if he gives the sash that Bertilac's wife gave to him back to Bertilac, there's no way that he wouldn't be able to tell that I know this sash, I know where it came from, and then suddenly everything's going to make sense, right? He got his wife's sash, meaning he knows now where those kisses were coming from, right? And so Gawain is protecting her by not telling him, but he's more protecting himself and his honor. And so right before Bertilac returns from the hunt, he does go to confession, right? He prays for confession, and in the Catholic religion, if you pray or if you confess your sins prior to your death, then you are absolved of all sin. And this is going to be key towards the reason for why Gawain is able to make it out of the Green Chapel, right? So we're going to see how it works towards that administration of vengeance, or the return blow from the Green Knight. But what we do have still is the failing of the second test, right? Gawain, he has confessed his sins, but he still is lying and is putting at risk his immortal soul by not being honest and dealing fairly with his lord and in his own emotions, right? So that's where we get by the end of book 3. Next is going to be book 4. We'll talk about that one next week, and how Gawain and the fallout of the things that happened after the Green Chapel. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. We'll continue a little bit more on Tuesday, talking about the outline, and we'll cover a sample of what the film review might look like. And then on Thursday, we'll talk about book 4 in its full and entirety, and we'll kind of like put all the pieces together to talk about why is the Green Knight the fairy world, why is it challenging Christianity, and what is the goal of it, right? And things like that. So that's pretty much what we got for today. If you have any questions, reach out to me, and I hope you guys enjoy your weekend. Bye.